Fill me until I break. The virgin wife strips for her mafia boss husband. In a world where loyalty is paid for in blood, where power is the only law that matters, a woman was forced into a marriage she never chose. He was the mafia boss everyone feared, cold, untouchable, shaped by betrayal. She was the quiet wife who carried more courage in her silence than he did in all his guns. Their love wasn't gentle. It was dangerous, messy, and born from pain. But when two broken souls collide, sometimes love doesn't heal you. Sometimes, it destroys you, beautifully. This is their story. Of power. Of redemption. Of a love that burned through everything in its path. Now let's dive into the story, Fill Me Until I Break. A mafia love story you'll never forget. The night it happened, rain fell like the heavens were warning her. Isabella Marino sat in the back of a black car, the sound of thunder swallowing her heartbeat. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, the wedding ring on her finger gleaming faintly under the passing streetlights. She was only 21, too young to understand the cost of peace, too gentle to belong in a world like this. Her family had made a deal, one that promised safety, wealth, and silence. And the price of that deal was her. The car wound up a hill, past iron gates and guards who didn't dare blink as the DeLuca insignia came into view, a silver serpent coiled around a dagger. It was the symbol of one man, Lorenzo DeLuca, head of the DeLuca family, ruler of southern Italy's underworld, and, as of tonight, Isabella's husband. The villa was nothing like she'd imagined. It was grand, yes, but not beautiful, not in the way a home should be. It was too silent, too cold, the kind of place that felt haunted by the ghosts of secrets. Lorenzo stood at the top of the staircase as she entered, tall, unreadable, dressed in black from head to toe. His eyes, dark, sharp, and distant, scanned her face, her dress, her trembling hands. He didn't smile. He didn't even move until she stopped before him. "You're smaller than I expected," he said at last, his voice smooth, low, and impossible to read. Isabella lowered her gaze. "My father said this marriage would bring peace between our families." "Peace?" Lorenzo's lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "There's no peace in this life, signora. Only truces that don't last." The silence between them was thick. Somewhere, thunder rolled again. Isabella's throat tightened, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. He studied her one last time, and then simply said, "Follow me." They walked through marble corridors lined with paintings of men who looked just like him. Cold, proud, untouchable. The air smelled faintly of smoke and rain. Isabella felt like a lamb walking through a cathedral of wolves. When they reached the bedroom, Lorenzo stopped. He didn't turn to face her. "You'll sleep here," he said quietly. She hesitated. "And you?" "I'll be in my study. Don't wait for me." Her heart stung at the words. She hadn't expected love, but the emptiness in his tone still hurt more than she wanted to admit. He started to walk away, but her voice, fragile and trembling, stopped him. "Lorenzo, do you not want this marriage?" He paused at the door. For a long time he said nothing. The only sound was the soft hiss of rain against the window. Then finally he answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wanting things gets people killed, Isabella. You'll learn that soon enough." He turned his head slightly, eyes catching hers one last time. "In my world," he said, "love is weakness. Don't ever try to love me." And with that he was gone. The door closed softly behind him, and the silence that followed was louder than any gunfire could be. Isabella stood in the center of the room, surrounded by gold and glass, feeling smaller than ever. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, the veil, the dress, the face of a woman who now belonged to a stranger. Slowly she reached up and removed the veil. Her hands were shaking. She took off the necklace her father had given her, then the heavy earrings, until nothing of the perfect bride remained. Outside, lightning flashed. Inside, she stared at her own eyes, wide, lost, but burning with something she couldn't name. "If love is weakness," she whispered to herself, "then I'll learn to live without it, even if it breaks me." And that was the night Isabella Marino became Isabella DeLuca, the wife of a man feared by the world, and the woman destined to break his heart. Days passed, then weeks, and the DeLuca mansion remained as silent as the grave it resembled. Every morning, Isabella woke to a world that didn't speak to her. The servants bowed politely but never met her eyes. The guards watched her like she was both treasure and prisoner. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath when she walked through the corridors. Lorenzo DeLuca was nowhere to be seen most days. When he was home, he was quiet, always behind a locked study door, speaking in low tones with men who wore guns like second skin. She would hear fragments of their conversations, Words like shipment, betrayal, debt, and blood. And then silence again. Always silence. The mansion was enormous, too big for one woman's thoughts. At night, Isabella found herself wandering through the halls just to feel less alone. She memorized the way the moonlight fell across the marble floors, how the wind whispered through the old Italian windows, how the walls seemed to listen. It was beautiful, yes, but it was beauty that bit. On the third week of her marriage, she discovered the piano room. It was tucked behind two heavy oak doors, untouched for years. The keys were dusty, the stool uneven, but when her fingers touched the ivory, something inside her came alive again. She began to play. Softly at first, the same melodies she'd learned as a child in the convent. The kind that made nuns smile and stars seem closer. Her music drifted through the empty halls like a ghost. And for a moment the house didn't feel so dead. That night as she finished playing, Isabella felt a chill crawl up her neck, the sense that someone was watching her. She turned, and froze. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, half hidden in shadow, his expression unreadable. Her heart jumped. "I'm sorry," she stammered, rising quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb." "Keep playing," he said quietly. She hesitated. "You like music?" He didn't answer, just stepped closer. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "You play," he murmured, "like you're breaking." His words hung between them, heavy, fragile, true. Isabella swallowed hard, unsure if it was an insult or the first human thing he'd ever said to her. He walked to the piano, standing behind her. She could feel his presence, calm, powerful, dangerous, but not cruel. He reached out and brushed a speck of dust from one of the keys. "My mother used to play," he said suddenly. His voice was quiet, distant. "Before my father made her stop." Isabella looked up at him. "Why?" "Because music made her feel," he said. "And feelings make you weak." He turned away before she could reply, the faintest hint of sorrow hidden in his eyes. As he reached the door, she whispered, "I don't think feeling makes you weak, Lorenzo. It just means you're still alive." He paused, not for long, but enough for her to know her words had found a place somewhere deep in him. Without turning back, he said, "Go to bed, Isabella." And then he was gone again. That night she couldn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, though she still was, but because for the first time, she'd seen something in her husband's eyes that wasn't anger or control. Something that looked almost human. The next morning, when she came down for breakfast, Lorenzo was already seated at the long dining table, reading the newspaper. A single cup of black coffee sat untouched beside him. She hesitated in the doorway. He didn't look up, but his voice carried across the silence. "You can sit," he said. So she did. Carefully. Quietly. For a long time neither spoke. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I heard you play again last night." Her heart fluttered. "I didn't think you'd mind." "I don't." Pause. "It's peaceful." It was the first kind word he had ever given her. She didn't smile, not fully, but the corners of her lips curved just slightly, the smallest bloom of hope in the ashes of a cold world. Outside the rain had stopped. The sky was pale and fragile, like something trying to heal. And as Isabella sipped her tea across from the man who ruled a kingdom of violence, she realized something quietly terrifying. The man who swore love was weakness had just let her see a crack in his armor. And that was how it began, not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with a single note on an old piano and a silence that finally began to break. A month passed. The days in the De Luca mansion grew quieter, but no longer cold. Something was changing, not in words but in moments. Lorenzo had stopped avoiding her. He began joining her for breakfast. Sometimes lunch. Once he even asked her what kind of flowers she liked. She didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because she didn't trust her own voice when he looked at her that way. For the first time since their wedding, Isabella felt seen. And that scared her more than being invisible ever had. That week, the De Luca family was invited to a grand gala, a gathering of power and danger disguised as elegance. Lorenzo insisted she attend. It would be her first appearance as the Mafia boss's wife. The dress chosen for her was black velvet, soft as midnight. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the girl who once hid in convent gardens. Lorenzo appeared behind her, already dressed in his tailored suit. His reflection met hers, dark eyes, sharp as glass. "You look," he started, then stopped himself. "What?" she asked quietly. He straightened his cufflinks, his expression unreadable. "Presentable." But the way his eyes lingered on her neck said something else entirely. The gala was held in Naples, in a mansion that glittered like sin. Men in tuxedos, women in diamonds, guards at every door. It was beauty masking corruption, the kind of night where champagne sparkled beside guns. Isabella walked beside Lorenzo as cameras flashed and voices whispered her name. Some smiled too politely. Some stared too long. And one man, tall, young, with a smooth Italian charm, dared to approach. "Mrs. De Luca," he said, kissing her hand. "Your husband hides you like a secret. Now I see why." Lorenzo's head turned slowly. His smile was polite, the kind that promised danger. "Careful, Matteo," he said, voice calm, quiet. "Secrets are valuable things. And some aren't meant to be touched." The man laughed awkwardly, retreating with his glass of wine. But Isabella could feel it, the storm behind her husband's calm. All night, his hand remained at her lower back, possessive, protective. And maybe just a little afraid. Later that night, after the gala ended, they drove home in silence. The city lights flickered across his face, revealing the battle in his eyes. When they reached the villa, Lorenzo got out first, slamming the car door harder than necessary. Isabella followed him inside. He didn't stop walking until they reached the hallway. Then, without warning, he turned, his gaze fierce, burning. "What was that?" he demanded. She blinked. "What was what?" "That man," he said. "The way he looked at you." Her heart skipped. He was being polite. Polite. His voice was low, dangerous. "He was flirting with my wife." "And what was I supposed to do?" she asked softly. "Slap him in front of everyone?" He stepped closer, too close. His jaw tightened, but there was something raw behind the anger. Something that wasn't about control, but fear. "You don't understand," he said through his teeth. "In my world, a glance can start a war." She held his gaze. "Then maybe you shouldn't have brought me into your world." The silence that followed was heavy. Painful. And then, slowly, Lorenzo exhaled, like a man realizing the truth he'd been trying to avoid. "You don't belong to anyone else, Isabella," he said quietly. "Remember that." His tone was softer now, trembling between rage and something dangerously close to longing. Her voice trembled. "And who do you belong to, Lorenzo?" He looked at her for a long time, and for a moment she thought he might answer. But he didn't. He turned and walked away instead, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the sea, her reflection pale against the glass. She thought about the way his voice shook when he spoke to her. About the man beneath the power, beneath the cruelty. The man who seemed to be fighting something he didn't know how to name. Jealousy, she realized, wasn't just anger. It was fear. And in Lorenzo De Luca's world, fear was something he never allowed himself to feel. But for her, he did. And somewhere deep inside, Isabella knew, that was the beginning of everything that would one day break them both. The storm came without warning. Both outside, and inside the De Luca mansion. It was just past midnight when the first shot rang out. The sound shattered the quiet like glass breaking in the dark. Isabella jolted awake, her heart pounding, the distant echo of men shouting filling the air. Footsteps thundered in the hall. Doors slammed. Somewhere below, someone screamed. And then silence. That awful, waiting silence before chaos begins again. She climbed out of bed, barefoot, trembling, clutching the thin silk of her robe as she stepped into the corridor. The air smelled of gunpowder. One of the guards, bleeding from his shoulder, shouted for her to get back inside. "Stay in your room, Signora. Don't move." But she didn't listen. Something in her chest, something stronger than fear, pulled her forward. She had to find him. The grand staircase was littered with shards of broken glass. A bullet had shattered the chandelier, scattering diamonds of light across the marble floor. Outside the open doors, lightning flashed, and for a second she saw them. Figures running through the rain, gunfire lighting the night like fireworks of death. Lorenzo's men were under attack. And somewhere in that storm he was fighting. Isabella ducked behind a column as two guards dragged in an injured man. Her breath came fast, uneven. She wanted to move, but her legs refused to obey. Then she heard his voice, harsh, commanding, alive. "Secure the east wing. Don't let them through." She turned toward the sound. And there he was, Lorenzo, his suit torn, blood on his cheek, gun in hand. He looked like something out of myth, half angel, half devil, leading his men with calm fury. Their eyes met across the chaos. For a second, the world fell silent again. Then he shouted, "Isabella, get down." Before she could react, he was there, grabbing her by the arm, pulling her behind a pillar just as another bullet sliced through the air where she had been standing. His voice was low but fierce. "What the hell are you doing here?" Her eyes filled with tears. I heard the gunshots, I thought. You thought wrong. He gritted his teeth, his hands gripping her shoulders. You could have been killed. She shook her head. So could you. Their breaths tangled, hers fast and frightened, his heavy and restrained. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he exhaled, his tone breaking just slightly. Don't ever run toward danger again, he said. Not for me. Her voice trembled. But who else will? Something in him froze. He stared at her, searching for words that didn't exist, for a truth he'd been trying to bury since the day she entered his life. He looked like a man standing on the edge of something he swore he'd never feel again. Hours later the attack was over. The rivals retreated, leaving behind blood, silence and broken glass. Isabella sat in the wine cellar, wrapped in a blanket, her hands still shaking. When Lorenzo found her there she looked up, eyes red, face pale. He didn't speak at first. He just stood in the doorway, his shirt torn, knuckles bruised, eyes hollow. Then he walked to her, slow, deliberate, and knelt beside her. For the first time he didn't look like a boss. He looked like a man. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head. No, but you are. He glanced at his arm, a deep graze still bleeding. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Her voice broke. You could have died. He tried to smile but it came out wrong, sad, tired, real. Death doesn't scare me, Isabella. Then what does? She whispered. He looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes she saw it, the truth he'd been hiding behind anger and control. You, he said softly. You scare me. Her breath caught. Why? Because you make me want to feel, he whispered. And in my world that's the most dangerous thing of all. She reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched his face. He didn't move away this time. For a moment the world outside ceased to exist. No enemies. No blood. Just two broken souls sitting in the dark, learning the shape of something they weren't ready to name. He closed his eyes, leaning slightly into her touch, like a man starved of warmth finally daring to believe in it again. No words were spoken after that. There didn't need to be. Because that night, in the quiet aftermath of violence, Lorenzo De Luca finally held his wife, not out of duty, not out of possession, but out of something fragile, terrifying, and new. Something that would save him. And destroy him all at once. Morning came slowly to the De Luca estate. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the scent of smoke and gunfire. Sunlight crept through the curtains, painting pale gold over the remnants of chaos. For the first time in weeks, the house wasn't guarded by shouting men or hurried footsteps. It was silent, not the empty kind of silence Isabella had known when she first arrived, but the heavy, fragile calm that follows after something breaks. Lorenzo was alive. But he was different. He spent hours in his study that morning, door locked, phone silent. No meetings. No commands. No sound. Isabella stood outside that door for a long time, unsure whether to knock. She could almost feel the war happening behind it, not the one with guns and enemies but the one inside his chest. When she finally turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Come in. It was quiet, almost reluctant. She opened the door slowly. The room was dim, lit only by the weak light of the window. Lorenzo sat behind his desk, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. His tie was loose, his hair unkempt. He looked less like a king and more like a man who'd finally stopped pretending to be one. Sit, he said softly. She obeyed, taking the chair across from him. For a while they said nothing. The ticking of the clock was the only sound between them. Then Lorenzo leaned back, eyes distant, and spoke. When I was 15, he said slowly, I learned that loyalty doesn't save you. Fear does. Isabella watched him carefully, sensing that this was the first time he'd ever told anyone his story. My brother Matteo, he continued, his voice rough, was the good one. Kind. Honest. He wanted out of the business, out of the family name. My father called him a disgrace. His hands tightened around the glass, the veins in his arms visible beneath the sleeve. One night Matteo tried to run. They caught him. My father ordered me to watch as they made an example of him. He stopped, breathing unsteadily. The air seemed to freeze around him. I didn't move, he whispered. I didn't speak. I just watched. His voice cracked, the first fracture she'd ever heard in it. When it was over, my father looked at me and said, Now you understand, Lorenzo? Love is weakness. The room went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Isabella's throat tightened. You were just a boy. He shook his head slowly. No. I became what he wanted me to be. I took his place. And I promised myself I'd never feel again. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw it all. The guilt, the rage, the exhaustion of a man who'd built an empire out of ashes. But then you came, he said quietly. Her breath caught. You walked into my life with your trembling hands and your terrified eyes, and for the first time in years I couldn't think straight. I started feeling things again. And I hated it. Why? She whispered. Because it makes me weak, he said. And if I'm weak, everyone I love dies. Isabella rose from her seat, heart pounding. She walked around the desk until she was standing beside him. You think love kills, she said softly. But it doesn't, Lorenzo. It does. Fear does. He looked up at her, the hardened boss of the De Luca family, lost and broken like a child who never got to grieve. Her hand trembled as she reached out, touching the side of his face. His jaw tensed, but he didn't pull away. Your brother's death wasn't your fault, she whispered. And neither is what your father made you become. Lorenzo's eyes glistened faintly, though he tried to hide it. For a man who'd killed and conquered without hesitation, a single tear felt like surrender. Then, in a voice so low it barely carried, he said, You shouldn't care about me, Isabella. She smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. It's too late for that. Something in him finally broke. The armor, the walls, the cold indifference, it all cracked beneath the weight of her words. He stood, reaching for her hand, holding it as if it was the only real thing in the world. I don't know how to do this, he confessed. How to be this. Then we'll learn, she said gently. Together. Outside, the sun rose over the Sicilian hills, turning the sea gold. Inside, the man who once ruled through fear let himself be human again, if only for a heartbeat. And as Isabella rested her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heart, she realized that she wasn't falling for the monster everyone feared. She was falling for the man beneath the scars, the one who was finally brave enough to break. Love changes everything. Even in a world built on power and blood, love finds its way in, soft, silent, and dangerous. For a while, the De Luca mansion knew peace. Lorenzo laughed again, not often but enough for Isabella to see what he might have been in another life. He stopped locking his study door. He took dinner with her on the terrace instead of alone in the dark. And sometimes, when the nights were quiet, she would play the piano, and he would listen from across the room, his eyes distant but no longer cold. The house that once echoed with silence now held something living. But peace in the Mafia is never real. It's only a pause before the next storm. It began with a whisper. A rumor that one of Lorenzo's men had been leaking information to a rival family, the Bellinis. At first he ignored it. Every empire has its gossip. But when two of his supply routes were ambushed in the same week, the whisper became a threat. He gathered his council one evening in the Grand Hall. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Among them sat Marco, his oldest friend, the man who'd stood beside him through every war, every betrayal. We have a traitor, Lorenzo said, his voice steady. And until I find out who it is, no one leaves this house. The men shifted uncomfortably. Marco met his gaze and nodded. We'll find him. But when their eyes met, Isabella noticed something she hadn't before, the faintest flicker of guilt, buried behind Marco's calm expression. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But her stomach turned cold. That night, Lorenzo returned to their room late. He sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders tense, eyes tired. They're coming for me, he said quietly. I can feel it. Who? She asked. I don't know yet. He rubbed his temple. But I'll find out. Isabella hesitated, then took his hand. Promise me something. He looked at her. No matter what happens, she said, don't let this world turn you into what your father was. His hand tightened around hers. I already am, he whispered. The next evening Lorenzo received a call. A voice on the other end, mocking, familiar. Funny thing, De Luca, it said. You let a snake sit at your table and then wonder why you're bleeding. The line went dead. Moments later, gunfire erupted outside. The mansion descended into chaos. Windows shattered, bullets ripped through marble, and screams echoed in the courtyard. Isabella was dragged toward safety by a guard, but she fought him. Where's Lorenzo? She cried. Signora, please. Stay down. She wrenched herself free and ran, down the hall through the smoke, heart hammering against her ribs. When she reached the main foyer she saw him, Lorenzo, standing over Marco, a gun in his hand, betrayal written in every line of his face. Why? Lorenzo's voice was low, shaking. After everything I did for you, why? Marco, bleeding and cornered, smiled weakly. Because you forgot who you are, Lorenzo. You got soft. All because of her. His eyes flicked toward Isabella. Lorenzo's grip tightened on the gun. His entire body trembled with rage, not from hate but heartbreak. "You were my brother," he said. Marco's smile faded. "So was Matteo. And you watched him die." The words hit like bullets. For a moment time stopped. Then a single shot. Marco fell. When it was over, Lorenzo dropped the gun, his breath ragged, his hands shaking. Isabella ran to him. "Lorenzo." He stepped back, his eyes wild. Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm human," he whispered. "Like I deserve to be saved." Blood stained his shirt, his hands the floor. He turned away, voice breaking. "This is who I am, Isabella. Every time I try to protect something good, I destroy it." "No," she said firmly, reaching for him. "You protected me." He looked at her, eyes full of guilt, love, and exhaustion. Then came another sound, sharp, violent, the unmistakable crack of a gun. Isabella gasped. Lorenzo stumbled. For a second he didn't understand. Then he looked down, saw the red spreading across his chest. A rival sniper hidden outside the window. The final betrayal. He fell to his knees, the world spinning around him. Isabella screamed, dropping beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. "Stay with me. Please." He managed a faint, broken smile. "You said love doesn't kill," he whispered. "You were wrong." "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "You can't leave me." His hand rose weakly, brushing her cheek. "If this is weakness, then I'll die weak." And then his hand fell. The gunfire faded. The guards stormed the grounds. But Isabella didn't hear any of it. She held him, sobbing into the silence, the man who had been both her captor and her salvation now slipping away in her arms. Outside, the dawn was beginning to break, red and cruel over the Sicilian coast. Inside, everything she had feared came true. Love had found her. And it had cost her everything. The world didn't end that morning. It simply went quiet. The sun rose over the Sicilian coast, washing the Di Luca estate in a cruel golden light, the kind of light that should have meant hope, but only revealed the blood on the marble floors. The house was still. The guards whispered. And Isabella sat where she had fallen, her hands stained crimson, her heart refusing to understand what her eyes had already seen. Lorenzo de Luca, the man the world called the Devil of Palermo, was gone. They buried him in the gardens behind the villa, beneath the olive tree he'd planted years ago. Isabella stood alone as the wind tangled her hair, her black dress fluttering like the shadow of a ghost. No priest, no prayers, no family, just silence. And her. The men who remained lowered their heads out of respect or guilt, she couldn't tell. When it was done, they left her there, alone with the grave and the sound of the sea. She knelt, her fingers tracing his name carved into the stone. Lorenzo de Luca. The man who built an empire. And lost himself to love. Days turned into weeks. The estate emptied, soldiers gone, halls deserted. The empire that had once bowed to Lorenzo now dissolved into whispers and fear. But Isabella stayed. She couldn't leave, not yet. She walked through the house like a ghost, touching the places where he used to sit, where his voice used to echo. Every corner of the mansion held his memory, his anger, his laughter, his impossible tenderness. And though the world believed Lorenzo de Luca had been a monster, Isabella knew the truth. He had been both the weapon and the wound. Both the sinner and the prayer. One night she returned to his study. The desk was still covered in papers, old letters, maps, ledgers. But among them, hidden beneath a folder, she found an envelope. Her name was written on it in his handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, short, rough, written in the kind of ink that smudges when the writer hesitates too long. Isabella. If you're reading this, I've already lost the war I was never meant to win. You once asked me what love meant to a man like me. I didn't know then. But now I do. Love is not weakness. It's surrender. It's the only battle worth losing. I don't deserve peace. But if there's a world beyond this one, I hope you'll find me there. Not as the boss, not as the monster, but as the man who finally learned how to feel. Oh. The paper fell from her hands, landing softly on the desk. And for the first time since his death, Isabella didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and breathed, slow, steady, almost peaceful. Months passed. The world moved on. But somewhere in southern Italy, whispers began to spread. Stories of a woman rebuilding what Lorenzo once destroyed. A woman who turned the De Luca Empire into something cleaner, quieter. Some said she ruled with the same fire he had. Others said she carried his ghost in her eyes. And on certain nights, when the sea wind brushed through the olive trees, she would sit by his grave, reading from an old book, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were wrong, Lorenzo," she would say softly. "Love didn't kill you. It saved you. It made you human." And the waves would answer her, in the language only the lost could understand. As the red dawn broke across the horizon once more, Isabella rose from the garden, her black dress glinting faintly in the morning light. She looked toward the sea, where the wind carried the scent of salt and memory. Somewhere deep inside she could almost feel him, not the king, not the killer, but the man who had once said her name like it was a prayer. And though her heart still ached, it no longer bled. Because love, she realized, doesn't end when the heart breaks. It endures, quietly, endlessly, until the world fades away.